getting people to say, oh, I loved this part, even though they hated all the other parts, or they hated some part that you really loved. You know what? If something clicked for them, that can be your trophy. That could be your reason to keep going.
How about we start with the conception of this idea of this screenplay? What ignited the idea? Well, what was the idea? How did you get this idea? What pushed you to actually start it? How did you get to the ScreenCraft wins from there? You can kind of just go with that and go into however much depth you want into everything.
A little bit about the screenplay. It's a story about a family of talking squirrels in basically the Pacific Northwest, and taking place mostly in like the Oregon Shasta region. And so what really spawned the idea was actually a road trip I took with my friend in the middle of college. We drove from LA all the way to Seattle and back. And again, we went up and down the 5 freeway the whole time, and the view was just incredible. And I think to me, as I was driving through it, I'm like, yeah, this is definitely the world I want to use for something. I don't know what, like, do I do something like a road trip thing? Do I scale back and do something that takes place in the forest? It's not just, I just wanted that backdrop so bad. And in college, I had a buddy of mine. I went to NYU for screenwriting, and a friend of mine there was also a screenwriter, and we would always kind of bounce back ideas. But I gave him 5 ideas about what we could do with that world, what I could do with that world. And I gave him this idea of talking squirrels. And he's like, do you do kid stuff? And I'm like, I've always wanted to try.
Nice.
So he was like, this is the best one if you want to do it. So I immediately kind of turned what was supposed to be sort of a road trip movie, coming of age thing, into just a full sort of DreamWorks Pixar type movie. Nice. About a family of talking squirrels in a forest. And then from then on, like, doing more research about the area and also about the environmentalism that's a really big part of that, about those forests, like with the upkeep of them, the forestry, and also just the fires. Like, the story kind of wrote itself. And again, during that road trip, we met so many fascinating characters that my friend knew, because he grew up in Seattle in the area. So we met this family there that he knew. It was like, it had 5 kids, these 2 parents that had invented some sort of like medical patent. So they were retired. Their kids were the most interesting people on the planet. When I walked in the house, they were twirling fire batons and playing VR.
Nice.
So it was like, okay, I'm going to turn you into squirrels. And this is because, again, when it comes to screenwriting, for me, character, besides the world building, character is the most important part.
Yeah.
Like, people really want to, like, that is probably the best way to hook an audience. If they care about the character, everything else will fall into place. That's probably the most important thing to me. So once I had these people, I'm like, yeah, this is it. I have my squirrels. Again, it was just critical thought that transformed that into a story through that world. So that was the big thing where it inspired it.
I'm curious. I mean, that sounds awesome. And you're right. That is such a beautiful scenery, that whole area right there. But why animation? Like, what got you into wanting to even do something that is animation in the first place?
I mean, again, as innocent as it sounds, I just wanted to try it. Like, I always loved watching animated films growing up. Like, I was obsessed with cartoons and anime. Like, I just love that medium. So for me, it was like, okay, everything I'd written in college so far was live action and more buddy comedy. And I just thought, and again, what I was going to sort of speeches and learning and reading books, it seemed like there was a lot of opportunity in animation as well, for some reason, because the way the technology was getting cheaper and more accessible as years went on. It's kind of ironic, because when you read older books from the 90s, 2000s, animation seems like a very exclusive club, kind of basically monopolized by DreamWorks and Disney. But now there's a lot more options, a lot more international options as well to do animation. So I just thought, you know what, this is actually a great idea. I'm just going to go with it. And I love, and also, personally, I have a lot of pets. I've had a lot of pets growing up. I have 2 Australian frilled dragons right now. I have 2 dogs at my parents' house. Like, I've just always had like random animals. So for me, I just love animals. They're just so funny and creative and just so unbelievably entertaining. That's the thing. I mean, at the end of the day, like, in some ways, talking animals can just sell a script with those 2 words alone. So for me, it was just kind of it was basically started as an exercise. You know what I mean? Let's try this out. Let's see what happens. And as I was writing it, I'm like, no, I love this. Like, I actually really enjoy this. And again, when it came to ScreenCraft, the way I saw it was like, well, if you write an animated screenplay that already fits a different category, that's a twofer right there. So you can meet your audience can be both ones that love animation, also ones that are looking for a family movie. So I thought that would also kind of give me a better shot. Because again, like as much as it's fun to write a movie that's very niche or self-centered, like at the end of the day, you are trying to get other people to enjoy it. So, and I come from a big family too. And the only movies that we would watch together that we could, since I have a 10-year gap with my youngest sister, is Pixar stuff. So
I mean,
think
Pixar
for me,
was my whole childhood too, you know, so nostalgic.
And it's brilliant stuff. And again, like, and as I got older, that stuff never got cheesy or corny. Like it was still really good. And people would still in college just watch that in dorms and stuff like that and just go nuts and cry. So I'm like, okay, this is definitely something that I love and want to try. So that's what I did. And I did not expect it to become my silver bullet, but here we are. So.
Well, okay, well, a couple of things. There's a couple of things I want to ask you about. First off, I'm pretty sure at this point, the animation contest is like the second most popular contest with ScreenCraft. You know, like is that true? I think this year, the animation, I remember seeing some statistic that they shared with me, and animation was like, it's just getting so much more popular year by year.
That's awesome.
That's a lot.
That's
but also,
awesome to hear.
It says a lot about, I mean, your screenplay must have been really damn good. Like the amount of submissions that come in for that, and then you won 2, that's really impressive. So congratulations. I mean, that's awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was not expected. I know that sounds cheesy and overdone at this point, going, I didn't know, but I literally had no idea. I had seen some of the log lines of the other finalists and I was like, those all seem pretty great. So I was very excited to hear that news.
So sticking on kind of this subject of animation becoming more popular, we have a Discord channel. There's a lot of people in there that are writing animation scripts, you know, talking about animation. So I'm curious, because maybe this can be helpful for someone coming in to wanting to do animation. Is there a fundamental difference in your mind, the way that you approach an animation script versus like a live action script, or you kind of just treat it the same? Like, how do you start to develop the characters and stuff when it comes to animation?
So it's almost unconscious, but at the same time, like I'll write a script that maybe I assume should be live action, and maybe in my head it is. And then when I give it to someone, they're like, yeah, this sense of humor and this pacing, this is weird. And I'm like, what if it was animated? Like, oh, this is great. So there's certain things that animation just get away with, especially if you watch like anime. There's just laws of either physics or conversation that just don't matter. And for me, it kind of like sets humor free a little bit, because there is a lot of attention to detail you have to pay as a screenwriter every time you write a scene, because every screenplay is basically just an enormous Rubik's Cube of plot lines and character arcs and planned payoffs. But with animation, you can, especially in the action blocks, you can do stuff that just doesn't make sense logically, especially not live action. But animation just makes someone laugh. And that I think is what's awesome. I think, again, if you have trouble with either if you're very fast paced, or you love transitioning to different environments super fast, like you like just a kind of sort of free for all or free form of humor and also of world building, then animation is just perfect. And that, I think, for me, it's like almost like animation is unshackling, where live action will have more rules. I think that for me is the key difference, that if I want to write something that I just don't want to be, that I don't want to be basically held back by limitations of just like all of Newton's laws, I'm gonna make it animated, and that's what I'm gonna stick with. So that I think is also what makes it very appealing, because it does push the limits of what you can put on paper. And again, with animation these days, as I said, like back in the day, this whole medium felt really exclusive to a bunch of large animation houses, and it still is obviously controlled for the most part by those. I mean, Disney certainly hasn't gone anywhere, but again, when I took this script out in the professional world, I was like, oh no, there is actually an enormous amount of third parties or even second parties that can finance these things and animate them around the world, which is really cool. So I think opportunity is also a big thing now with animation that makes it very appealing, is that there is more options now to find a career or to find financing. So that, I think, is what's really awesome, is that every year more opportunities come about in this genre, where that is not always the case with other genres as well. So
sure. I mean, I know I have seen, like on my end, like I was saying, it's more popular for ScreenCraft, and I meet more people that are into animation. You know, every single day I'm meeting more people. You said you're into anime, or I don't know if you said you're into anime, but you mentioned anime. So I'm curious, do you have any interest in writing anything in the anime space? Because that's something too that has just blown my mind how popular it's been getting the past few years.
Sure. I mean, here's the thing. Anime is almost like 100% international stuff. So it's
Yeah.
like as much as I enjoy anime, I don't even know if I would enjoy it if I was in English. That's the other thing. Like there's some things that make sense when it's something like that is foreign. Everything just kind of clicks. And the campiness of it is also something that they can just get away with. And I get a lot of writers that come to me with ideas because they love anime so much, and the idea is so insane. There's like no setup; they just do it. So I think animation, especially sort of Western animation, is its own thing. I think it's different.
Yeah.
I think Rick and Morty is a great example of something that just could not come out of Japan, but also it's hard to translate into as an anime. You can't really count. It's its own thing.
Yeah.
It's just different the way that they write their stuff. It's awesome. It's hypnotizing, and I do love anime. But watching anime to me is like playing video games. Like I love this, but I'm not going to be able to really use this if nothing but like inspiring colors and sort of characters. I think that those kind of bigger concepts and characters from anime are great inspiration. But writing for anime, I don't see a path to it unless I move to Japan.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say too. Like it's more and more popular. Like friends that I have that I never would have thought are into it. And I'm like, well, how does that even work in America? But I guess it's like it's not quite, I don't know, in America in a sense that you can write an anime show and it work in America. So I guess
it's exploding, and a lot of cartoons, like even The Amazing World of Gumball, these American, they're getting inspired by it. They'll even throw episodes in that just fully on like pay homage to Naruto or Dragon Ball, and that's awesome. But at the end of the day, like it's like forbidden fruit. I'm like, wow, I wish I could do something like this, but I have no means to access like that whole market. It just seems like it is something that in some ways is just appealing because it is from something new. It's so different. And a big thing that anime does, I think that, or at least some of the crazier ones, is that they just completely skip setup or rule building. Like, oh, I can slay ghosts with this blue sword, and they don't explain that. You just see them immediately slashing, and you just have to follow it. And in America, you have to kind of set the whole thing up, because those Western audiences would be like, well, I want to know how any of this makes sense before I jump in. It's like Game of Thrones. You can't really show the dragons right away. You got to kind of show the people and why they have dragons. And then you can enjoy the dragon fight. So that I think is a big thing that kind of separates it. And also gets writers super excited because it's fun to just start writing the best parts right away. But it does get you it spoils you because they can get away with a lot more leniency in their audiences than we can, because a big part of screenwriting, at least on the Western side, is setting everything up, making things make sense. Whereas anime, you can have something that makes absolutely zero sense, and I'm just going to eat popcorn. I'm going to love that stuff. So
since we're on that subject, I would love to, I definitely want to get into a little bit more kind of detail on, because I know you optioned this animation script, right? That I saw from your email, which is amazing. I mean, that's such a big deal, and you're now like in a relationship with an agent, right? Or a manager, and it looks
agent actually. Yeah. No. Yeah.
And so that's awesome too. I definitely want to get into that stuff and just kind of get some tips or get some advice on like how you approach that whole process. But I would love to get a little bit more on the craft from you. You talked earlier about character and that you love approaching things from character. You're talking about like setups and payoffs. So like when you first get an idea, what is your process for like, okay, idea on paper, how do you start to develop your characters? Just, I would love for you to just give any thoughts you have on, and think maybe you can give some tips on maybe people that are just starting out with screenwriting. Like what is your process from going from idea to paper to screenplay,
Sure. I think the biggest spark, the biggest catalyst to any of my ideas is just something cool. I know that sounds kind of opaque, but like basically like I'll just come up with something cool. Like, oh, someone that can, I don't know, reset time, or someone that can see through walls or whatever. Like I just hear something interesting. And then from there, again, what I've learned throughout years of screenwriting and also a bunch of classes is that character seems to be the most important part of a screenplay. There's character, there's theme, and there's plot. That's kind of the three I call it CTP. So it's character, theme, and plot. You need all three to have a good screenplay, but they're not equally important is the biggest thing. And also one of the three could be the start of the screenplay, but the most important one has to be character. And for my screenplay, what came first was the theme. It was just the world, right? It was the forest, it was the animals, it was that feeling of being in that environment that started the idea. But the first thing I had to do before I could come up with anything was get the characters. And that's the biggest thing. Because I think, especially with television too, what brings you back to the show, I don't know who I got quote this guy. It was, I don't know where this quote came from, whether it was TikTok or something even more obscure. It was like, characters will bring you back to episode 2, not the world, not the plot. You're going to come back for the character. You want to see what they're going to do, who they're going to kiss, who they're going to kill. The characters are going to bring you back and keep you interested. The world and plot is awesome, but that's icing on the cake. So the biggest thing for me is from when I come up with an idea, whether I'm driving or whether I'm just like staying up late at night or any other situation where these things just kind of pop into your unconscious. After that, I'm really convinced, and it's in my notes app, but I actually want to go back and visit this. The first thing I do is I'm like, all right, who's the character? Who's the protagonist? Who's the villain? And then at that point, if you can create something convincing there, the rest will fall into place. The rest is an easier job. That's the thing for me.
Gotcha.
Is that if you have a great character, the theme and the plot will probably follow. And the plot for me is usually that cool thing that I originally thought of, right? But that's a one sentence gimmick that will make the log line, but the character will make the show.
Yeah. So what? So like, what do you have any exercises or anything you do to start to develop your character? Like, do you do backstory and stuff like that?
There are 50 question pamphlets out there that are great. That like, where were they born? What time are they born? What's their favorite color? What's their hobbies, their interests? I think the first thing I do is I make a Word document with characters. I give them a paragraph of backstory each. I treat it like I'm a nerd making the Wikipedia article for this character. That's the biggest thing. I'm like, you got to be a lore builder. It's like, where they grow up, what are their interests, who are their crushes, who are their villains, like what are their enemies, what are their fears or phobias or allergies. So what I do is I take those characters, usually about maybe 4 good guys, 2 bad guys, and then some side characters. And then I give them each a paragraph. And some of the side characters will probably have like maybe only a couple sentences, but the main characters, they will all have a paragraph of information about them. That's the first step. That is like Paleolithic when it comes to making a screenplay. And then I'll go on to the step outline after that.
Gotcha. And do you think about I'm not sure if you're a fan of Aaron Sorkin. He's just like, obviously the screenwriter. He's like the most famous screenwriter, but he, and it's classic, like Aristotle poetics, right? Intention and obstacle. Is that something you write from the start when you're developing characters? Do you think about like intention, obstacle, or do you keep it more? I mean, just would love to know kind of your thought process for how you get up to like, it's time to start typing the script,
Sorkin's awesome. He gets away with the same way anime gets away with just random rules. He gets away with just writing endless dialogue because he's Aaron Sorkin, and that's awesome. And then you learn, you go to class or whatever, and they're like, yeah, actually you should only have like 4 lines of dialogue before you have someone get shot by a gun. You don't want to droll on unless you're famous. But no, so you were talking about Aristotle poetics. So I like to use psychology over the Greeks and more look towards behavioral psychologists and stuff like what Jung wrote about, and even the existentialists. Like the first thing I do is I make a foil. I basically say like, okay, what's this person's opposite? And that's probably going to end up being the antagonist or another character like a best friend to make things interesting. So what I do is I basically compare their protagonist to their antagonist, and that usually builds the interests and objectives of both. Whatever the antagonist wants is going to be the opposite of your protagonist and vice versa. So I do think having a great villain fleshes out your protagonist, even if that villain is a fire or a bad guy with a cape. either way, that's probably the best way to show the reality of it. And then again, a big thing with characters, especially these days, is you can't really have Captain America anymore, who's just perfect. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, you really want to find flaws in your character. And a great way to do that is, again, using people around you as examples. That's a huge thing, is like, even if it's not conscious, you're always using people you meet in real life to kind of influence these characters. And it's not smart to 1v1 here, or 1-to-1 these characters. Like, oh, this character is based off this person, period. Then this person, like, you want to have like 8 people represent one of your characters.
Gotcha.
Because real life is not going to be as interesting as the whatever you're writing. So you're going to want to pull the most interesting aspects of multiple people to create your character, whether it's the protagonist, the antagonist, or any of the other characters. So the big thing with character creation, as I said, is the most important part, is just using what you know, using the people you know, especially the most interesting people you have ever met, into building that character. And so that's the big thing, is that, like, think about the 8 most interesting people you know, and then you're going to just melt them into one pot, and that pot's going to be your protagonist.
I love that.
And they're gonna basically be, at that point, hopefully be so interesting people will root for them or fall for them or hate them, and that could also help you a little bit. So
no, that's cool. Like, talking about delving into the psychology aspect, that's not many people I've interviewed have taken it that far, so I think that's really interesting to like go there. Do you think that's what primarily like interests you about screenwriting or storytelling, is actually like the psychology, the human behavior and psychology of these characters?
I love psychology because every bad person somehow thinks they're good, even if it's in self-interest. And every good person can be completely bad. Like, the way psychology works, as far as I'm concerned, is like, every person born on this earth can go in any direction. So I love looking at examples or conditions, or even just instances where the nicest people do the most evil thing, and the most evil people end up doing the nicest thing, because that is also what makes TV and films interesting, is when characters show something that's so like real yet ridiculous. It's just kind of enticing. So I think psychology is, for me, not for everybody, but for me, it's kind of the key to showing, to basically embellishing characters' actions and their decisions.
Man, that's awesome. And then, so we talk about character. Do you outline? Do you do like extensive outlining? Do you kind of free flow? Like, what is your process once you actually, get to the script, when it's time to start writing the script?
Sure. So once you have that sort of Word document vomit of just like characters, worlds, fun facts, things you just love, you basically sit, whether it's with AirPods on or jogging or in a car, you just kind of sit in your world, look around, think of cool things that might happen in the pilot or the end of the show. You just kind of live in that world. Once you have that document, that's just a vomit, right? It's just a big giant notes app. The first thing I do, and I tell this to everyone I know, I learned it from one professor at UCLA, who basically just said, try a step outline. And I said, what is that? And step outline is where every scene is one sentence. So if you're writing a hour-long pilot, it's going to be like 20 sentences, maybe 4 pages per sentence. So you then take what's like almost an hour, like 60 pages of screenplay, and you reduce it into 15 sentences, which seems challenging. But once you have those 15 sentences, you literally have the bones of your entire screenplay in front of you. And that is so helpful, because when you make a good screenplay, it's because all those puzzle pieces interact with each other from page 2 to page 58. All those planned payoffs can be better set up if you know what's going to happen in each scene, even if it's just you only know a fraction of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then once you have the step outline, which again, if you're running a movie, that could be anywhere from 100 sentences to 50 sentences. I think with my movie, it was probably like 30 to 40 sentences, right? And those spread out to what ended up becoming 106 pages. But when you have that in place, and again, that step outline is going to be so different from the script, right? You're going to come up with so many different things. And as you're writing, you're going to come up with ideas that, okay, yeah, these scenes don't work anymore at all. They are not going to mix well. That's fine. But to see your entire script on one page in the beginning is so helpful.
Yeah.
because you have, again, you're trying to keep track of 100 to 110 pages of content, or not, whatever, 90 to 100 pages. And that is just so hard to do solo. Even with two people, it can be a difficult task. And I know people have those giant poster boards with post-it notes and stuff. That is kind of what I'm talking about here. They'll turn those 50 sentences into individual post-it notes, put them on a giant board they bought from Office Depot, and then just stare at it when they're trying to fill in the blanks. And that's fine, but it's a lot less resources to use just one Word doc and use that sentence thing. And then as soon as you have that step outline, what you then do is you make the real one. So what you do is you'll then just hit the space bar in between each sentence, give yourself enough room for like 3 paragraphs, and then you just write that scene. And it's all of a sudden that sentence is now just the title of the scene. And then you just write what happens.
Yeah.
And that's when things start to make more sense. And also and again, if you have to change one of those step outline sentences, that's fine. It's going to happen when you go through it. But that's the best way, I think, to write, is to have in even one word, just to have everything from page 1 to page 100 or whatever set up and ready, and just like in one piece. So you can just see the finished product.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just kind of, I don't know, you're just walking blind through the forest. There's no map.
Well, I love,
and again, it's a terrible map, right? The step outline's an awful map. It's disgusting. It's got mold, but like at least there's a map. And if you don't have that, then you're just kind of writing blind, and you're going to get lost, and you're going to forget what you wrote on page 3, and you're just going to make up something on page 60. So that's the big thing. Step outline. Love that stuff.
I've heard, I used to be one of the freaking naive writers who's like, oh, I don't want to outline, but it's it's just insane, the difference. And I love how you describe it like a puzzle. That's real, especially like if you're thinking about things in terms of setup, payoff, Chekhov's gun, when is that going to come back in the end? Like, you have to have something to keep you on track, So I love that. I've never heard of someone call it a step outline before, but I'm going to dig into that more and try that process for sure.
Give it a shot. I give this advice to a lot of people who are like, I have this idea, I don't know what to do with it. I'm like, well, literally, if you can sum up each scene in a sentence, then you're probably going to be able to finish this thing. Yeah. If you blindly go, you're going to get lost in the swamp. That's the second act. You're going to become a meme before you even know what's happening. And so I feel bad because I'm like, don't blame yourself. Like, no one does this. Like, I mean, maybe someone does, but most people that are really good, they don't just go, guns a-blazing into the second act. They have the whole thing outlined in a sentence. And again, this whole step outline process is super helpful for Act 2. Like, primarily, it's kind of why it exists, because everyone has a great ending with the guy dying and bleeding or whatever, and he's like, I love you. And they have the beginning where someone sets off with a gun right down the long and winding road. It's the middle part that screws everyone over. And if you have that skeleton in place, you have a guide. You have this little lantern bringing you towards that epic moment. So that is why step outline is awesome, because you won't get lost in the middle, which is again where most screenplays go to die, as I'm sure everyone has told you.
100%. That's where the magic can happen, but that's also where everyone dies. That's where you give up on it. So do you think about I just love talking about the kind of the nitty gritty stuff. How much do you think about setup and payoff? And how much do you go into symbolism? Do you really think about kind of the subtext of your screenplay when you're writing it? Because I've heard both sides. I've heard people say, no, you shouldn't think about the subtext, just write the script and then you can go back. But then I hear people say, I start with the deeper themes and the subtext, but I'm curious, what do you think about when you're writing the script mostly?
I think that subtext, just philosophically for me, is an individual choice. I've seen both schools of thought where in New York, I saw people going, oh, this sunlight actually means Aphrodite's love. And it's okay, well, all I see is sunlight. And then you go to sort of LA, it's just full entertainment based. And it's instead the sun has a face and it's talking and it's explaining itself. Oh, okay. So there's you can go full meta, sort of ethereal concepts and throw them in there. That's great. But I think I'm just biased, and then I personally just love entertaining films, and those will have a lot less subtext. They'll have them again. It'll be most of the meat will be coming from the characters and the dialogue and the actions that they kind of go through and their obstacles. So subtext is awesome, but in my opinion, it's the cherry on top. If you want a message, and again, my screenplay has a metaphor. It's basically about climate change and how we kind of ignore all of our ecological responsibilities. And that's great to say, and that gets lots of applause at a whatever speaker series. But at the end of the day, it's a talking squirrel movie. So that was the first priority, is tell the story of this protagonist navigating her family and navigating her world. And then after that, I can lay on dialogue and action blocks that will then infatuate that subtext of climate change. So that I think subtext is awesome, but it is a last stroke of the brush sort of thing to add on, and it's great. And what was the first question? It wasn't about subtext. It was about
setup and payoffs. Like how much do you plan, like setups and payoffs and everything?
Yes. So setup and payoffs, in my opinion, are actually the best. It's the cheapest, fastest way to just make a good script. I swear to God, like every time someone gasps in a theater because someone dies from a poison, it's because they set up earlier that person's allergic to peanuts or whatever. Like that's what makes people excited. Like, oh, that's the guy allergic to peanuts. He's gonna eat the peanut. He's gonna die, and they're like, they love it. And even though it's not that well thought out, like it's a peanut allergy, people love that stuff. And that I think is what really separates scripts, is that planned payoffs are the gasp moment of a script. When you set something up and it pays off, the audience always enjoys it, always digs it. It's always awesome when the gun that was buried and forgot about like gets kicked out of the dirt in the last battle and the guy has a gun now. That's great. We love that stuff. And even though maybe you think, oh, I don't know if my audience would be able to remember that the gun was they will. The audience is smart. They're going to remember. It's almost unconscious, and they might forget about it. That's the best way to do it. Planned payoff is you really want people actually to forget about the gun, because it'll make them all the more exciting when it pops up at the final battle. So planned payoffs, I think you can, and the best part about planned payoffs, they can be added at any point in the process. You can finish your script and go back and finish them. You can even be shooting the movie and then just decide to add one in. There have been reshoots where they're like, you know what? It would be great if this gun was planted in the dirt earlier. Okay, we'll just shoot it and we'll just add it in, even though we're already in the post process. This happens a lot in the professional world at every stage. And it's so important, because it's probably one of the biggest separators from a novice script from a professional script is planned payoffs. And what I'll do, even if I'm writing a cartoon that's like 13 pages long, something really tiny, I have to have one. There's got to be something. You can't just have whatever clears the obstacle in the third act. It can't just come out of nowhere. It's got to come from something that was set up, because that makes good TV or a good film. That's what really kind of separates it for me. And again, when I read scripts that win contests, guaranteed there's something that gets planned payoff. And the best part that I was saying is that you don't have to be stressed out and doing this during your outlines or step outlines. You can do this in later. Just make sure when you read your script, if nothing gets paid off, if nothing is planted and pays off, you should probably add something, because otherwise it's going to be French.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I feel like you said, it definitely is a separator with amateur novice screenwriters, and it's also like, you feel like the filmmaker cares about you more when these payoffs come in. Like it just feels like they put more effort into formulating this story. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, honestly, like the flamethrower thing is what made me love that movie. Was like, that's how the whole thing ended up, was him freaking burning them in the pool with the flamethrower that he couldn't even operate in the beginning of the script.
Yep. You know? It's one of the few things you even remember from the movie. And that's because it's the best. They're the best parts.
100%.
Like there's that, even I'm trying to think of Avatar. I know it's coming out, it's being re-released, but I was thinking about how one of the few scenes I remember is when he tames the giant flying animal, and it was exciting, because in the beginning they're like, the last guy to tame a giant animal was like, I don't know, 500 years ago. So then when he gets on this thing, you're like, oh wow, that's awesome. Like, and you don't even see it coming. You just get excited every time. So again, those are the moments that people will talk about after the movie ends. And when people see a bad movie, they'll be like, oh, that ending came out of nowhere, or that makes no sense. Like, how did they beat the bad guy? That's cheesy. And honestly, it's usually only cheesy if there's no setup. Like if you don't show how the bad guy has a weak spot in their lower left spine, then when they just die instantly from a punch back there without any setup, you're like, okay, I don't get it. Like, not to bash Star Wars, but there's a small hole in the Death Star that if you shoot a thing through, it just blows the whole thing up. Like, that's like the most infamous one, right? Like that's the one where it's like, okay, with one sentence in the beginning, you could have had Grand Moff Tarkin go to Vader. Oh yeah, by the way, like we have a weak spot of the Death Star. We're not fully built, you know, and that's all you need to. But they instead made an entire movie 40 years later explaining that small ventilation shaft called what is it? Solo. I don't even remember the name of that. Rogue One. Yeah. Oh, by the way, it was intentional. Okay, cool. Thank you. 2016.
Yeah, it's too late. I mean, Jesus.
I mean, at that point, it's like they're just trying to cover their tracks. But that's a great example. And again, Star Wars doesn't need that. It's Star Wars. But that's a great example of like, oh, if you're wondering why that certain part of a movie felt cheesy, it's probably because they didn't set it up. And and some of the cheesiest things in film can be you can get away with it if it's set up. So that's why planned payoffs are just the most awesome part of a movie. I grew up here almost my whole life. My parents moved here when I was 3. They work in the entertainment industry, so that was kind of the background of my childhood the whole time. They both worked at Nickelodeon while I was in elementary school and everything, pretty much till high school. So that the background was like, oh, you can make a career out of this. There's, you know, my parents obviously enjoy their job and stuff like that. And although I did not make the decision to go into screenwriting until college, I think the whole time beforehand, I wouldn't say intimidated, but I was just like, I wanted to keep my options open. Yeah. And again, I think even having close friends and family that were in that industry, it still seemed like kind of a far-reaching and incredibly arduous goal. And again, everyone at my school, all my friends decided, you know what, I don't want to pursue anything with a chance of failure or nomadic like chance. I'm going to go into banking, software engineering, or consulting. And kudos to them because they are chilling right now. But I think for me, when I got to college, I realized, okay, you know what, like, my whole life I've been storytelling. My hobbies have always been doing stop motion projects or writing things. Like every time I went to class in English or creative studies or even history, I was doing better than math. That's not true. I liked math, but I never enjoyed it. I always enjoyed all the writing programs and stuff. And again, all my after school programs were writing based. So I was like, okay, like this is definitely what I love to do. And I think when I got to college, I was intimidated by the thought that everyone at film school would be a little Spielberg's ready to go, but they were just normal people, you know. Once I actually met these film majors face to face, I realized they were no better at screenwriting than I was at this point. We're all just getting started, and again, everyone's got to start somewhere. So, I think the biggest thing for me was once I actually met screenwriters, I lost that intimidation factor of like, oh, these people are just like me. They're just trying to figure out how to do it. And you'll meet people that have won Oscars that are still incredibly self-conscious and insecure about their work. Like that's just kind of how it works. So I think for me, college was really the kind of start where I decided to make that full-blown decision. And you really got to put the time and effort in to do it, to become good at screenwriting. This is a long process. It's not music or even, acting you can do at any age. But again, like, of all the arts, screenwriting is probably the longest slog. Like it is, and you can find success at age 55 or even 70. That is actually what I like about it a little bit. Yeah. Is there's not really a rush. Like you want to be at the peak as fast as possible, like any other human trajectory. But like I saw the appeal of doing something that I love for basically my whole life if it works out. Like it's not something that you have to do right now or later. It's really something you can enjoy forever. So I was all in. I went to NYU undeclared. I was still debating med school, but I didn't like seeing people get cut open. So I was like, all right, I was either a lawyer or this. And I just, once I started taking some film and screenwriting courses, I'm like, nope, I love this. Like, I really want to do this. And I did. I started a sketch comedy group at NYU. I just kind of went full blown into the arts. It was like a late blooming thing. I guess that was kind of how to put it. I didn't really do musicals or anything in high school. I was mostly just doing football and homework. But once I got to college, I just went all in. I got to finally kind of find my passion.
How was New York? It's so different than Los Angeles. Like, had you visited New York before you went there, or was it like new to you when you got out there?
I had 2 aunts that lived there. So I had gone there like once a year for like a couple of days. So I for me, it was always just like, it was like Europe. It was amazing. There's castles, like there's lights, there's Nintendo World. Like it just felt like a giant Disneyland for me. But once I actually was there, I was like, no, this is actually, like, you can live here. You can do this. I loved it. I loved every second of it. I really did enjoy living in New York. It is dreamy. the only big thing for me is that as I was going to New York, I kind of learned, well, as dreamy as this is, there aren't really a lot of jobs here in the film industry. There's a reason Los Angeles is so famous for movies. It's where everyone works. Like, yes, there's Vancouver and Atlanta, but like LA is the place to go. And I had my bedroom back home was waiting for me, free rent. There's no reason for me to stay after college. But again, everyone I met at NYU was super cool. They're still doing all kinds of film stuff, and half basically came out here, half stayed. But the ones that stayed had to go and do more corporate stuff in the film industry, which is still awesome and looks cool. But again, I was like, well, if you want to do something creative, it sure seemed like LA was the place to go.
Yeah.
And I'm not wrong, because again, when I came out here, like I started getting production jobs. I got one writer assistant gig. And again, none of that would have happened if I was in New York. I just don't know what I would have done. And again, it's if there's any place more expensive than LA, it is New York. It's not cheap to be there. So it was sort of, for me, it was like kind of a natural decision to come home.
Yeah.
And again, use my contacts out here and network and whatnot to pursue this. And again, ironically, I was not the only one from my high school that made that choice. A good friend of mine went to USC for business, and then all of a sudden just decided, nope, I'm doing film full time. So he got into their sketch comedy world, their TV world. And so I would come home and he would just introduce me to like 20 new people that are all now screenwriters and filmmakers and shit. So it was like,
it's awesome.
It was amazing to have that network too, thanks to my high school friends to come back to. So that was a big thing about LA that I loved. That I had a lot of friends here in the industry. And again, networking is basically the most important aspect of every art.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
I do want to get your thoughts on that for sure. But I did want to ask you, this is a question that just comes up all the time. A lot of young filmmakers. I actually have a screenwriting group. I have a Discord and I have an Instagram page, just like aspiring screenwriters, just supporting each other. And one worry that a lot of people have is, do you have to go to film school? Is it necessary? And I like to ask everyone that I talk with, what are your thoughts on, like, if a young, 19-year-old out of high school is contemplating film school, no film school, maybe they can't afford it, maybe they live in a different state. Like, what would be your kind of general advice? You know what I mean? Just like, what would your thoughts be on that?
Sure. So, and I had a little bit of this conversation with myself thinking about grad school for film writing, for just like re-rolling the dice. And I'm not going to grad school. I've not, at least for now, but that obviously means an extra year. But again, when it comes to film school, I'll say this: I did NYU for a bachelor's, and then I went to a UCLA professional program for about a year, which was only a couple grand. It was pretty cheap, and it was a whole year. And I swear to God, I learned more in that class than all of NYU about screenwriting.
Wow.
So I don't think film school is necessary to learn how to screenwrite. However, what I would pitch about school that's so important is the networking.
Yeah.
Because I made a lot of friends at NYU, and my friend made a lot of friends at USC who are now working everywhere. And when I get jobs, I get them through my friends, not my old screenwriting professors. So I think just grounding yourself in reality, the network that comes from a film degree can be worth the tuition alone. Like, it will, if you get the right friends and you really kind of create a network out there, it's going to be worth it, because film school is obviously not cheap. Every year it gets more expensive, but that's the big thing, is that, like, I think here's the thing, if you're old and you're not going to go to college, you're done. Do not worry. Do not feel FOMO, because if anything, you're just probably missing out on networking opportunities, not learning the craft. You can learn the craft through books and through cheaper courses, even online stuff. But for me, the networking is the biggest pro of film school. But that's also completely random. So that could also be sort of risky, right? Is like, if you're under the impression I probably won't make a lot of friends, or I don't know if it's even worth it. And it's also why, like, during COVID, people were just like, hell no, I'm not going to film school, because there's no way to network. You're on Zoom every day. And so if you asked me this question a year or two ago, I'd be like, no, like, don't, like, just try to hold or defer, like, wait, because it'll be worth it. But now that people are back in school in session, I think it's a good idea. I am pro film school, because all my friends are from film school. Like, it really does start a different bond. You'll make friends at work, but it's so hard to get started. And that's kind of the mantra of the film industry. Once you get in, you can kind of fly, but it is super hard to get in. So, and the best way is to start from school, start from those friends that you make, unless you have family friends or even high school people that are in the film industry. That could work. But again, college is the big one, because people are now, unlike high school, people are now going to this location specifically for this interest, and you're going to meet them and be forced to make friends with them in certain ice-breaking activities, and even in class and in projects too.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll hand you a camera with 3 random people, and no matter who they are, you're going to be basically, brothers and sisters by the end of it. It's like war a little bit. So that aspect is great. The price is obviously one of the cons. And then in terms of the screenwriting craft like that, I think you'll probably learn more by just doing your own research. And also the biggest thing about screenwriting, learning the craft, was for me just getting notes from my friends. Like getting notes from your friends and family, even your family, just getting peer review is the most important part. Screenwriting circles are a big popular thing. You have a Discord, like that's where you're going to learn more unconsciously how to make a better script. And because you're going to get little tidbits of information to come in. All you really need is maybe one big course. I think it's similar to learning a language, where it'd be helpful to have like one studious course, and then from then on, just try talking to people that are French, or start putting your phone in French. Like start with something to go off of, like a big baseline. And then from then on, you can probably learn everything. So that's where I think, like, if you didn't go to film school, do not worry. You'll probably be just as good at screenwriting if you take maybe one cheaper, small, pretty intuitive course. And then from there, go to peer reviews, do Discords, like do that kind of stuff. That will basically build the same skill set for a fraction of the price. Yeah. Film school should just be basically a networking thing if you're going to do it.
And you kind of hinted at it earlier, but it's like, you got to make it worth it, right? Like it's your responsibility. If you're going to go to film school, don't be lazy, like make it worth it. Get as much as you can out of it. Cause that's another thing that I have friends that went to film school and like gave up on film afterwards. And I'm like, man, that's like, and it happens all the time, but it's like, they kind of didn't take any initiative when they were there, to like really capitalize on the opportunity,
Yeah. And this is why I pitch. And again, this is more a question towards grad school, because that's kind of the age range that I'm talking to these days. And, but here's the big thing. People will ask, and this is obviously one of the goals of a screenwriter, one of the bigger ones that's tangible, is getting representation, right? Like that's your Ark of the Covenant. What are you after, right? It's something physical. Because writing is such a weirdly sort of broad subject. You want representation. And when I got out of college, when I was looking at the different routes to that, besides just knowing the mafia, the two biggest ones were basically getting one through school, through a grad school program, where managers will come to you. They come in circles. They will look through the class and try to find people they want. Or you win a contest and give yourself your own clout and build yourself a reputation from scratch, and luck, or whatever deems those readers at ScreenCraft, whether it's luck or skill. But when I took that into account, I said, okay, you can either spend $100,000 at a grad school just to have a 5% chance of getting a rep, because let's not forget, they don't rep everybody in the class. There's maybe 30 people there. They maybe rep 5 or 6. Like it's to go through all that and then just to give up is just an enormous waste of time and money, where with a contest, it's significantly less amount of investment financially. And it's, at the end of the day, probably better odds to just get a rep through if you win a contest, as opposed to, because again, getting into grad school is its own accomplishment. If you're going for a really good one, like that's a very hard admittance rate or whatever to get in. You go through that whole, you already won a contest. You then have to win a second one in the classroom called being the best person in that class. And if you're a contest winner, you've skipped that whole step. So for me, the decision was like, okay, I think originally I thought grad school would be a better way to find representation. But at the end of the day, once I started really exploring my options on Coverfly and ScreenCraft, I'm like, no, this is definitely a better shot. And also I think it's more free of variables as well. You're going right in. Like there's obviously the variable of who's reading your script, but I do think that you skip all the social aspects of grad school and the time, and you just go right for the kill.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I have representation yet, but let's take the option screenplay as an example. How would I gotten to that step without this contest? There's no way. And it just took me right to the end of Rainbow Road. Like I was just there at the finish line. So because of this contest.
Well,
so I think was really great about that.
I would love to get your kind of quick rundown. I mean, it's already almost 7, but I don't know if you can go a little bit past 7.
Yeah, no, we're good.
I would like to get your rundown on like so once you enter the contest, you wrote your script, you entered the contest. What happened when you got the phone call or the email announcing that you were the winner? What was like the kind of process to getting to where you're at now, where you have your script option and you're basically right there to getting representation? I mean, it's, like right there in front of you. Like, what was the path to that from winning the contest?
I mean, I was in my pajama eating nachos when I got the call. It's not that exciting. The moment itself, it was, I mean, I was excited. I was really happy, but how does that work? Well, here's what happens. You win, you just, your brain gets excited. You buy yourself whatever, a drink or Starbucks. And then the next step is just waiting, because what has basically started is now you've started this, everything's hot now. You're on top of the world. People are going to start looking for you. The press gets released. And again, winning a ScreenCraft contest only gets better, it seems, every year. Like I won the first one in December. And when I won the second one in May, there was a whole press report. There's bigger posts. ScreenCraft now puts your face on their account, which is great. Because again, publicity is key. Because managers and agents, the biggest thing that I learned, they look for people to rep. You don't look for them. They come to you is the big thing with representation. They come to you. So you got to give them a reason to come to you. And winning the contest is probably the most practical, right? I'm a winner. Like just that sentence alone is attractive to people, because their job is to find people that are good, and they're going to use the ScreenCraft contest as their metric. That's how they're going to do. These are interns. These are people just like us that are like, hey, could you find me some better screenplay? And then what are they going to do? They're going to, like us, they're going to go online and just look for people that won stuff. They're going to look for winners. They're going to look for press articles, people that are hot. And that's why winning a contest is a long slog, and it's also just like it's rapid fire success. When it rains, it pours sometimes with ScreenCraft. So when I won, the first step, besides getting your prize money, very fun, is waiting for the real prize, which is basically the outreach. So what they'll do, and this is why I love ScreenCraft, is they're not your manager, but they basically become your manager, mini manager. They will literally get your resume, they'll get your life story, they'll get your other accomplishments, and their job now is to pitch you like a puppy at a shelter. Like, we're gonna get you adopted, we're gonna do this. And they do. They go out, they use their networks, their contacts, and they basically just continue to pitch you months and months after. Even as they get more winners and other finalists, they continue to really kind of go out for you and help you on your way. And again, with the option contract, that was pretty fast. So I don't want to spoil anyone else that wins or just trying. Like it's completely random. Like if you go on the ScreenCraft website, you can see the success stories. You can see people that get signed 2 years after they won, 2 months after they won. It is random, but it seems, generally speaking, that the people that win at these contests get something out of it, Yeah. And again, and if they don't, like it definitely helps on the at the end of the road. Like it definitely does continue to look good on resumes and whatnot. So with the option contract, I got very lucky. This company wanted to make talking animal films. They had their metric system, their investment company came up with the algorithm or whatever that said, we need a talking animal film because it's going to make money. It's going to get good reviews. It's going to work, right? They had this company is really cool. They're called Story Warrior Media Capital. They had contacts around the world that could make and distribute an animated film for a relatively affordable price, which again is what I was saying earlier about how animation has more resources now. This is the prime example of that. Like this would not be and again, when I got the call, about the contest win, I was very excited and super happy. But again, every time that I talked to a relative or someone that hit me up like, hey, when can I see the movie? Yeah. It's like, well, I had to explain, you're never really going to see it. It's just kind of a proof of concept for my skills. No one's going to make a talking squirrel movie. And then I got a call that someone wanted to make a talking squirrel movie. And I was completely flabbergasted again. And Coverfly helped. They responded to that industry mandate and basically sent the woman at this production company the top animated films. And again, winning a ScreenCraft contest gets you on the red list. I can't guarantee that, but if you win it, pretty much the red list is obviously prestigious, but it's also category based now. So it's a little easier and less of a excruciating grind, especially if you win a contest like ScreenCraft. They give you a lot of points, gives you a lot of extra publicity. And that's a big thing. The first thing you notice about winning a contest, your script's now on the red list, right? Or somewhere close. It's got a higher percentage rank, whatever it is. You instantly get digital trophies added to your script, and that will get you attention from everyone that's on that website that's looking for that kind of stuff. So Coverfly basically just literally sent my script and a couple others from that red list over to the production company. They loved mine and they reached out, and the rest is basically history. They offered to option it. I've already rewritten them a draft. Like, again, animated movies take years to make. Like, animation is the longest production schedule of any film. So I'm not expecting to see my movie in theaters, or if they even decide to make it. Again, everything's still up in the air, but getting that far was incredible because I know other screenwriters that have been repped by agents and managers for years that have never gotten any of their own stuff produced or even optioned. Like, again, that's a big thing, is what's really exciting about it.
100%. Like I was saying earlier, I mean, winning I think sometimes, honestly, like, I think some people downplay a little bit, like, thousands and thousands of people participate in these contests. And so it's a big deal just to win a contest, but then going to the next level and actually getting a contract is like huge, So again, congratulations on that. That is really awesome. So before we kind of get off, I'm curious, or here's a good question. Like, writing is a very lonely craft. It's very hard to stay motivated for a lot of people. And what, like, I don't know if you struggled with how do I get going or writing this script or staying motivated, but what would be like any advice or any last kind of words of wisdom, just from your experience of what you've gone through so far, on what would you tell someone who's like right at that intersection where they're contemplating giving up on pursuing this? Like, what would you tell them?
If they're on the precipice of giving up on screenwriting?
Yep. Like, they've been doing it for a couple of years and maybe they're really talented, but they just can't get that break,
Well, let me think. Again, besides pumping yourself full of caffeine or some other antidepressants, the biggest way, I think, to keep yourself going, some writers use writing partners. That's probably the easiest. I shouldn't say easiest. I don't want to sound like an elitist, but like, writing partners, I would say, are so important, more for the psychological aspect of having someone to hold your hand through this entire career than the skill set they bring in writing, which is also very important. But like, at the end of the day, like, I do understand the beauty of writing partners, because it does get very lonely and it does get very unmotivating because of the time that it takes between success and failure. Like, there's just, you'll put all this effort in something to fail 6 months later when they announce the results, or the pitch they said no. But it's like, these failures and these wins, they both drag you on. Like, it takes a toll. It takes a long time. Writing, you might strike gold, but you're probably going to be digging for years on average beforehand. And so a writing partner is a great way just to kind of keep yourself motivated. Peer review is great. Like, if you get people are good at criticizing you and giving you real feedback, if they're saying this stuff's really good, they keep going, that's going to help. And if they're saying this stuff sucks, then just get better. If you never get better, then okay, then just maybe it's a hobby sort of thing. I don't think contests should be the means to prove to yourself that you're good. I don't think they're the be all end all, because they are incredibly random. I've sent the screenplay, I shouldn't say where, but I won't, but I sent a place that got not even placed in the first round, right? And it's the same draft as one that won 2 contests.
Wow.
I once got a discount on the blacklist because I asked for 2 reviews and they were so polar that they gave me a third one for free, and the third one went more positive. But I was like, what happened? And it was like, did that reviewer just have a bad day? I was genuinely confused. And so was the blacklist. So they just discounted
Wow.
a third one. So there are times where you'll write something that's so great, people will just absolutely hate it, and other people will absolutely love it. And that just, it can be that random. But I will say this, like, even when you get a quarterfinalist thing, you get some placements, they do help a little bit in spirit. They do give you a little motivation. They go, oh, okay, I'm not alone here.
Yeah.
And so I think it might take a couple of years, but like eventually you will, if you really put your heart and soul into it. I can guarantee at some point you'll find your proof of success wherever it comes from, a contest or just in the people around you that enjoy this thing. And so for me, like even with the winning, I know it was kind of fast. I was still pretty young for those finalists. Like it did feel like for that 2 or 3 years after college that everything was kind of a slog writing wise. Like was pursuing a career in production to pay my bills, but it had not been since college that I had any real proof that my stuff was any good. There was no trophies or anywhere. And then this contest happened. It really kind of, again, if I ever thought about quitting screenwriting, that has kind of been squashed by this. And again, this project that I got optioned, it could turn into dust. It could just be a check at the end of the day and nothing happens. And I'm still not represented. But at this point, like what ScreenCraft does give you, it at least gives you the hope and the confidence to keep going. I do feel that every year it gets harder to break into this career. But at the same time, when you do have that moment, that victory, even if it's small, it really does help give you a better mindset. It helps with psychology so much. Yeah. So for people that are looking for motivation to keep going, peer review is probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Because I think, and again, and my favorite way to get notes is someone will say something that they love. Again, and also this is maybe a tip when you're giving peer review, find something in the script that you love. Hopefully there's something, say you love it, give that person a little lift of the heart, and then you can critique. You can then destroy that thing. Like just take a bulldozer to it. That's fine. But you always got to give a screenwriter a little cupcake before you shove broccoli in their mouth. Definitely. So, and I think when you're a screenwriter, especially if you're alone and not with a writing partner, getting people to say, "Oh, I loved this part," even though they hated all the other parts or they hated some part that you really loved. You know what? If something clicked for them, that can be your trophy. That could be your reason to keep going. Yeah. And now those little successes will add up to enough confidence to try and do this for a living, which is again takes an enormous amount of just brazen confidence. Because again, you'll hear this a lot from everywhere. No one knows anything, right? No development executive has ever been 100% correct. And you'll see all the time when you watch a movie that's so god awful or a show that shouldn't exist. You're like, what was that? And it's like, well, it's because there really are no rules at the end of the day for what you want to make or what you don't want. There's math, but it's never really consistent. So you just need, I think, showing your work to other people is got to be the best way to keep going. That's the best way you're gonna find motivation. If you are finding yourself just keeping everything to yourself or you don't want to show it, that's probably a sign that you probably shouldn't pursue this, because this is not a solo journey at all. You'll see people that maybe have written every word of a script by themselves without any thought, but there's no way they're going to find success without getting it reviewed by other people. Like you just need a community to do this. Otherwise, It's just too lonely and it's crushing. So, yeah.
Man, I love that. That's a really good way to think about it. I really appreciate that.